Okay, so we're now going to look at Act 3, Scene 2 for our survey of extracts from King Lear, and this would help us to prepare for the paper 1, tragedy paper on the AQA syllabus. So Act 3, Scene 2 is probably the most famous scene in the play. It features Lear sort of shouting at the storm. So there's a massive storm going on, and Lear is shouting at it, encouraging it, actually, mostly saying, go on, carry on, do your worst. And it's the key sequence, really, of the play in which Lear has been reduced from total power and authority at the start of the play to total lack of those things, to kind of complete powerlessness, complete loss of selfhood, really, as he's out there in the storm with no protection. A few people trying to help him, though, which is part of the meaning of the scene. So if we locate the passage, we'd say that it comes in the middle of the play. So, it's really kind of the heart of the play, the essence of what the play is about. And what the play seems to be about is asking this big question continually. What happens if you reduce a person to nothing, you take everything away from them? It also seems to be the whole play seems to be creating a sense of the world as a chaotic and disturbed and traumatic place in which terrible things occur, in which there's very little way of dealing with those things or mitigating the pain that's associated with them. So it comes immediately after Act 3, Scene 1, which is one of those little scenes. There's very few in the play that aren't particularly meaningful, but this one is clearly an introduction. And there's a few like that which seem to introduce things that are about to happen, to give us a bit of a pre-warning. And so we'd heard Kent and the gentleman talking, and Kent sort of saying, oh, well, he's out, what's happened to Lear? And the gentleman saying, well, he's out there in the storm, and the fool's with him, labouring to outjust his heart-struck injuries, which is a great phrase, sort of trying to joke him out of his terrible pain, perhaps. So the fool and Lear principally, and then Kent arrives trying to help. The language is key to this sequence in particular, because what Shakespeare's trying to do is to create a sense of a storm in a time when there was very little by the way of special effects. There might be some kind of board they rattled. They didn't have any lighting effects because the plays took place in the afternoon under natural light, so they couldn't really do anything like in today's theatre, and certainly on TV you'd have darkness and flashes of lightning and things like that, but they wouldn't really have had much by the way of that. So what Shakespeare does is fuel that sort of furious atmosphere through the language, which is clashing and banging and crashing around in an incredible effect. So look out for that in this scene. And it follows, obviously, the main scene it follows is 2-4, where Lear had sort of had this reverse auction where Goneril and Regan had said, you can have 50 men, 25 men, what need one man alongside you, if you want to come and live with us. And then they pushed him out into the storm, basically, and left him and gone and cosily locked themselves away in Gloucester's castle. So it's the tragic outcome of a terrible mistake from the beginning, and it's a furious, wild scene that has to be acted in that way, but it's quite a difficult scene to act without it seeming very shouty, without this sense of the actor playing Lear just bellowing and it becoming quite unlistenable, really. And in some ways there's an argument that maybe it's better to read the play than to have it performed because of that. But let's have a look at the sequence. So the scene begins, having had that introduction so we know what to expect, so we're not really shocked by what we hear. We just start with Lear in the storm, raging, blow winds and crack your cheeks, rage, blow, you cataracts, you hurricanes. So the language is extreme. There's a lot of harsh sounding consonants to it, short, snappy words, the words bashing against each other in terms of the sound, those hard K sounds in cracking cheeks and then drown the cocks, and there's the hard D's in drenched and hurricanos and cataracts, so some hard C sounds there as well, and the plosive blow at the start and end of the first line, all creating this sense of extreme noise and vigour and violence. The play has been tense with violence all the way through, and now it explodes into a violent storm. Nature is violent, says Shakespeare. Nature is horrific, and human beings in the face of this are tiny and feeble and hopeless. He shouts out, go on, carry on. And he tries to sort of encourage the storm, really, and that's not how he remembers it later on, actually, interestingly. He sort of says he sort of raged against it, but he doesn't. He says, carry on, go on, do your worst, break up the world. So he's kind of summoning an apocalypse, really, here. He says, all shaking thunder, smite flat the thick rotundity of the world, smite the world, smash the world to pieces, make it flat instead of round, crack nature's mould, that making grateful man, that ingratitude is his big enemy, because he thinks that God and Regan have been so ungrateful. And so he's saying, just destroy everything. And that's a kind of interesting attitude that Shakespeare's hit upon there, which is that attitude of feeling that self-righteous sort of sense of, I am in the right here, and so everything I say, so he's going back to Lear's sense of self-righteousness again, but also that sense of, well, if I can't get what I want, or if the world's going wrong for me, then let's just destroy everything. So the fool's there with him, and he says, he tries to sort of, as it says, labour his out to outjust his heart-struck injuries. And what he tries to do is say, well, come on, let's just go inside, basically, giving him good advice, basically. He is neither pities neither wise man nor fools are playing upon his identity as a fool. So, come on, let's just get inside. Ask your daughter's blessing. So it's pretty good advice. It's the most sort of non-cryptic advice that the fool gives. Just say, come on, we need to get out of this. Lear seems to ignore that and just continue on with a kind of repetition of the same thing. Rumble your bellyful, spit, fire spout, rain, more fierce, angry, extreme language to express the storm, to create the storm through language. But then he says something quite philosophical, and it's more coherent perhaps than he was in 2-4. He says, I don't blame you for your unkindness, because, well, you might say it's a coherent argument, although it's a slightly odd one in the sense that he's saying, I don't blame the elements, I don't blame nature, because I never gave you anything. So you can treat me as badly as you like. They treat me badly when I've given them a great prize. So there's a sort of obsession which he doesn't really shake until perhaps his recovery in Act 4, that everything's about his relationship with his daughter, and he sees nature through that lens and says, I like you because you weren't unkind to me. Or at least if you are unkind to me, you didn't receive anything from me first. So you owe me no subscription, he says. But then he again goes into this thing that he went into in 2-4 of defining himself in terms of quite self-pitying language. And again, do we buy into that and start to pity him, or do we find him again rather self-involved when he says he's a poor, infirm, weak and despised old man? Is that not another version of unburdened crawl towards death, a sort of elaborate, almost melodramatic description of himself as being old, for show rather than for any kind of real feeling? But of course, who's he showing off to here? There's no one except the fool to hear him. He's still obsessed with the daughters, but then he also notices, it's foul. And there's a sense of just sort of slightly snapping out of it there at the end of the scene, realising that that's the essence of what's happening here, is that this weather is really, really bad. The fool chips in with some sort of rhyme here, which hasn't much meaning, but just adds to the sense of chaos, really, and adds to the weirdness and just the turbulence of the scene. He talks about houses again, so he's sort of talking about the fact that Lear's given up his house. And then this thing that the play seems to be a little bit obsessed with, Lear's obsessed with it too, women and their sexuality and their interest in their looks, And the Fool seems to have that too, that women can't be trusted, or women are, use their beauty to manipulate people and things like that, which may be part of this just generally misogynistic and patriarchal culture that the play seems to hover within, that most of Shakespeare plays exist within. And he's certainly not accepting of that on face value, although, in the 21st century would be more critical of that approach to life. Shakespeare is not endorsing it either. He has it here in a foolish rhyme, after all. Lear's response, no, I'll be the pattern of all patience, I would say nothing. There's that word nothing coming back again. Of course, he's said a lot, and he always says a lot. He doesn't know how not to. And he will usually continue on saying things, and of course we'll see that within a few lines he carries on with another long speech. So there's irony there, that he, for a moment, tries to silence himself but can't really. Anyway, he's distracted by the arrival of Kent. The Fool makes another slightly sexualized joke. He says, here's Grayson and codpiece. Codpiece is the thing used to cover up the middle of the male body, shall we say. And so often a Fool would wear a sort of exaggerated large size, one of those, this sort of joke about his sexual organs. The Fool, again, always throwing in this kind of rather inappropriate language, perhaps for comic effect, perhaps for just the effect of turbulence. Kent shows just gentle, simple compassion, really, but he has this great line, things that love night love not such nights as these, which is great, isn't it? Things that love, what are things that love night? Dark, demonic creatures that love to be out in the dark, but they don't love the night like this. So, and he again helps to create the effect of the storm in his language: wrathful skies, gallow, dark, caves, everything, sheets of fire, horrid thunder, roaring wind. So the language, again, rich in onomatopoeic suggestions of a very stormy setting, and that's, of course, Shakespeare really trying to create that storm through languages, as if he set himself that test, really. Can I make a storm appear on stage just by language? No special effects, no sound effects. Lear seems relatively oblivious to Kent's arrival and just carries on with his sort of shout of philosophical discussion. Talks about the gods again, and as we've said before, all the good characters seem to constantly talk about the gods and never seem to get any help from them. But he says that the gods are responsible for this dreadful pother over our heads. And then he talks about how the gods will use the storm to punish their enemies, which is a kind of fairly traditional idea, that God or the gods would send thunderbolts and lightning down to sort of smash or destroy sinners, evil people, criminals. And so he says, watch out, all you criminals, basically. You might get smashed to bits tonight by this storm. The storm will find you out. There's a sense there, that I hope that there is some sort of justice in this world, and that the good will be rewarded and the bad punished. But again, the play doesn't seem to be offering as much hope of that. It seems to be saying the opposite, really. That the bad thrive and the good are the ones that suffer. And he has that great line, which... Do we now feel that things are starting to turn, and we feel that we believe in this line? I am a man more sinned against than sinning. Is he? Or is that self-righteousness? Is he still believing in himself when the rest of us don't? Or are we beginning to see, well, yeah, no one really deserves this? Kent speaks, as the Fool does at times, almost like a chorus or the audience's voice saying, alack, bareheaded. This is bad. He's out here without any cover, without any support, no shelter from the storm. And he says, well, I know there's a little hovel, so there's some kind of shed or something out there on the moor. And he says, well, we might as well get in there. But he still throws in a few hard phrases, tempest, hard house, just to keep that stormy language going. Even scanted courtesy has a hard, flat vowels about, flat consonants about it. And we can see towards the end of the scene that there's a moment here. And it's picked up very much more in Act 3, Scene 4, where suddenly Lear starts to step out of himself a little bit. My wits begin to turn, he says, so he is feeling that he's going crazy. But then there's this consideration for the fool, which is more marked in 3-4, but here he says, come on, my boy, how dost, my boy, art cold? I'm cold myself. So he still has to kind of see everything through his own eyes. He has to experience the cold to know that somebody else feels cold, but he does notice first that probably the fool is cold. And this is one of the first moments where we see Lear showing compassion for other people. And I have one part in my heart that's sorry for the it's a funny way of putting it, but he seems again to be sympathetic. He seems to have found somewhere within him some sympathy at last, this time for the fool. The fool is always equated in the play with Cordelia, almost as if she's substituted by him when she's not on stage, or that Lear sees a similar sort of affection for the fool as he does for Cordelia. And as I've said before, perhaps the same performer performed the two roles because they're never seen on stage together. The fool has a little song, which is one of Shakespeare's favourite songs. He has it in Twelfth Night as well. The rain, it raineth every day. And it's that idea of just, bad luck follows us, bad things happen. And it always happens. It never stops. Torture never stops. And that seems to be the theme of the play, really. It's always going to rain. It's always going to be bad. Things are going to go from bad to worse. That's why it's the tragedy of all tragedies. And again, Lear says to my boy, sort of compassionately saying, come, bring us to this hovel, us, all of us, presumably, not just him, the royal we, but me and the fool, and you yourself, Ken. So we see that beginning there of perhaps the shock of what's happened to him has shaken him out of his complacency a bit. And we're seeing a different kind of Lear, one who is starting to come to terms with his place in the world. And we'll see a lot more of that in 3-4. The scene ends with a bit of a pointless, perhaps not even Shakespearean rhyme, which doesn't mean anything really, a sort of prophecy about everything. He's sort of ironically saying when all the bad things are turned good, basically. Lists all the sort of things that people do badly and naughty people do, and says, when the world is turned upside down, everything will be good, I suppose. It adds to that sense of confusion and sense of everything being tipped around. Of course, now the wheel of fortune, certainly where Lear is concerned, is totally turned, and he's gone from being in total power to totally powerless, being helped into a hovel by Kent. So things couldn't really be lower for Lear at this point. And the world is chaotic, stormy, deranged, and unpredictable. And that's the essence of this play. This is the kind of thorn bush at the heart of the play, this Act 3, where everything is turbulent and dangerous and cruel and bitter and sad and pathetic and ruined, really, and destroyed. The whole of the world seems to be falling apart. So perhaps finally we do start to feel that Lear does earn a little bit of our sympathy at this point, not least because he treats the fool with some sympathy, and that's the beginning of his awareness, which he never fully acquires, you might argue, but he gets close to some kind of learning. So this scene, this turbulent, stormy scene, is the essence of the vision of the chaos of the world that the play presents.